Welcome to the Fast Host Proactive Podcast, Spill the IT. Each episode, we'll sit down with some of the amazing Proactive team and chat through their experiences of the ups and downs of IT infrastructure management in small businesses. There's always plenty to chat about.
Welcome back, everybody. We're back here again at Fast Host Proactive HQ, here at their wonderful data centre in Worcestershire. And with me today, I have Gary and I have John, both from the Proactive team. Hi, how are you both?
Very well, thank you. Good to see you again.
Yeah, absolutely. Good to have you back on the podcast. So today we're going to be talking about the IT infrastructure challenges, or particularly around e-commerce. And we're going to try and lift the lid a little bit on that and explore some of the challenges maybe and some of the things to consider, specifically when utilising the services of Fast Host Proactive. But before we start, Gary, why don't you just tell everybody a little bit about yourself? Let's try and keep it to about a minute.
Good luck. So I'm the solutions consultant here at Fast Host Proactive, and so I engage with the sales teams, the end clients, and effectively make sure that we're delivering IT solutions that meet as many, if not all, of the business needs.
Yeah, fantastic. So, John, this is the first time you've been on a podcast with us?
It is.
Is it the first time you've been on a podcast ever?
It is quite daunting. Yeah.
Oh no, but it's all right. We know we don't bite. Right, so let's get into it. Let's start talking about e-commerce. So it's a really broad term, isn't it? And banded around in a sort of a general way. What does it mean to you?
Yeah, sure. It definitely is a broad term, and I think to put it into a short sentence, essentially, e-commerce is anybody or any business that's transacting online retailers. I think that's pretty much sums it up.
Gary, got anything to add to that?
As you said, it's super broad.
Yeah.
I think transacting or enabling transactions using online technologies.
So when we're looking at e-commerce, do you find many businesses that you'd consider to be e-commerce don't in fact consider themselves to be e-commerce?
Yeah, I think, I think when people hear the term e-commerce, immediate thoughts are an online storefront. We've all seen the pre-built packages where you can sell your widgets for £12 a widget online. But it's a little bit deeper than that. So we've onboarded a couple of clients who facilitate online transaction rather than do the transactions. So they are providing businesses with a platform on which they can sell, but they're not selling themselves as such.
Like a website platform?
Kind of, yeah, okay. Pretty much. So it's they're I suppose e-commerce as a service type offering. Mm-hmm. But again, the end client doesn't necessarily consider themselves e-commerce by the strictest definition, but actually, they are. And I think there's an element of e-commerce with almost any online presence. Even if it's not a direct transactional storefront, you are still selling your business through any online presence that you have, whether that's social media or websites or whatever that may be.
And so those challenges of dealing with those companies, what some of those challenges of dealing with people on those platforms? Is it quite slick? Do you hit some bumps on the road with it? What's the type of things that you experience?
I think typically, certainly the customers we've interacted with so far, generally start off with a small team selling a small amount of product online. And the generic challenges are fairly standard across the board, really, of any SMB, but certainly around kind of that internal resource. So typically you'll have a tech-savvy team member looking after the infrastructure as part of a much wider role. Mm-hmm. And you can imagine as an e-commerce platform or business scales, suddenly this tech-savvy team member that might be looking after finance or product suddenly has a lot on their plate. Mm-hmm. And things start being missed with the infrastructure. When you're looking at dealing with e-commerce businesses, handling transactions online, it's absolutely essential that you're getting things right with your servers for many reasons, not just keeping your store online, but actually keeping it compliant too.
Okay.
So if you start missing things such as patching and updating
Sure.
your servers, the knock-on effects can be absolutely huge, massively detrimental to not only your business but also your customers too.
So are they the typical things that get in the way of stopping sort of transactions or things falling over?
Yeah, I mean, it's a combination of things, really. You know, obviously, if you're not performing regular maintenance on a piece of infrastructure, it will be more likely to fall over in the same way as anything. You know, you maintain your car, you have your car serviced regularly for that exact reason, right? To stop it from failing. And I think the challenge that John spoke about is a real problem where small organisations potentially just starting out, somebody in the business will admit to owning a computer. They instantly become the IT manager, which in the nascent stages of the business is fine. You know, maybe they've got one or two servers to patch. Business isn't particularly booming because it's a new organisation, and so therefore that workload's easily manageable alongside their day job.
Yeah.
What happens, and in some cases really, really quickly, is that when that particular business starts to become successful and starts to grow, the demands for that maintenance grow exponentially with the growth of the business. The resource doesn't grow because it's still the same team, and actually the person who's IT manager still has a day job which has now become even busier. And so what we find in a lot of cases is that it's that routine maintenance that gets missed. You know, there's no flashing light to say do this or bad things will happen. So quite often it gets missed, and as John said, that can have impact on the business and your clients. You know, if your infrastructure isn't patched and up to date, you can't be PCI compliant, which is, if you're taking card payments, is a big thing. If you're not patching your servers, there can be security vulnerabilities, which means bad guys potentially could not only hack your site and stop you from transacting, worst case scenario, they steal all your customers' credit card details, and then you've got reputational damage and all of this kind of stuff, negative publicity that goes around that. So where we can help is that we can take over those duties. You know, we don't forget, that's our job. We don't push things out of the way because other things are, taking precedence. But yeah, we can kind of keep the lights on whilst we enable those companies to focus on the day jobs.
So just listening to you talk there, is it more the fact, do you think people just think it's too easy, or they don't really give it the due consideration? They think, actually, I've got an idea, I'm going to sell this. I'm going to set up a website, absolutely, we're going to get cracking and building this business. And then they're not really considering then the wider implications of being online. Is that true? Are you getting too many people start something and get midway down and go, actually, this is more than I want to bite off as such?
Sure. I mean, I think with the broad term of e-commerce, there's a lot of ways to go to market.
Yeah.
There's lots of ways in which you can become an e-commerce business. And one of the most simpler ways to do that is to buy a package online. And with that package comes some form of hosting. You have different platforms you can use to build e-commerce sites. Some of those are open source, which are the ones that we can help with, as you can then shift your platform to our platform as you grow. And typically those are the kinds of customers that we go after and support.
So let's talk about those platforms. Let's talk about what are those packages? What are those platforms people are initially starting with? Because obviously, people listening to this podcast, if they identify and think, well, yeah, actually, I've got that platform, and I can come and now talk to Fast Service Proactive. Mm-hmm. So, what are the typical ones people are actually using?
Sure. So, the most common platforms that we come across are Magento, GoDaddy, and then obviously your more kind of regular names like Shopify, for example.
Okay.
The platforms such as Shopify are what we call closed sourced, so they will provide you a template to build your websites. They will handle your transactions for you. They will integrate with lots of applications, but ultimately they also then host your site for you as well.
Right. So you're tied into the whole package, right? Okay, I understand.
So in order for customers on those kinds of platforms to migrate, they'd essentially have to build a site again from scratch.
Right.
With the open source platforms such as Magento, which are very resource heavy when it comes to the underlying platform supporting it, those are open source, and therefore we're able to then help those customers by migrating from the kind of the hosting is provided, which is typically going to be a shared kind of platform, whereby you're not necessarily getting access to the full resource. There can be issues with things like latency, And also, as you can imagine with an e-commerce site, uptime is massively crucial. I think people likely shop outside of business hours or working hours, and it's those times when your workers are going home that your website starts hitting peak traffic times. So it's important to have the underlying platform infrastructure supported and looked after around the clock, essentially. And it's those kinds of those customers and those platforms that would look to benefit from the services Proactive offer.
Yeah, that's really good. And good that you've named those platforms, because as I said, I think anybody identifying or sort of listening to this would see that as a possibility, especially identifying some of those problems you said. So at what level, you've got your e-commerce business and let's just say you've kicked off with Magento's site and it's going quite swimmingly, business is building. What's the leaping off point where people will start to consider actually this looking after this IT infrastructure is becoming a bit too much for me? I don't want to recruit because that's going to cost me a load of money, and at some point those people go on holiday, which is obviously another one of the things. At what point do people say, I've now got to change the direction? Do you see this a typical sort of turning point as such?
Definitely. It's generally when things get too busy. Sorry, I say generally when. It's generally after things get too busy to manage.
Okay.
So a lot of the organisations, not all, but a lot of the organisations we speak to, especially the sort of the more nascent ones, they're already on a burning platform. They're already struggling to support the platform that they've got. And so that is inhibiting growth of the business, because there is a real danger that if they promote their services, they onboard loads of new clients, there is a danger that the platform itself may become overloaded and fall over. And generally, for a number of reasons that we can talk about, and I think we've spoken about observability and monitoring data and what to do with that data. Generally, the trigger point is when clients are saying, your shop's really rubbish, it's too slow, or I can't do this, or this is crashing. Generally, most SMBs don't have the financial resource or the skills or the people resource to implement the systems that would give them the intelligence to allow them to scale more proactively. And so, generally we're involved just at the point where it's getting a little bit too late. And so we're kind of coming in on our horses with our armour, ready to rescue them from a scalable.
So I want to go off piece a little bit, but let's chuck a grenade in here. Let's talk about if these companies are using Magento as a platform, why would they not consider maybe going to a managed service provider or a managed IT solution right from day one? Because is there not an element of inevitability that you're going to get to that point? And is it harder at that point to do the transition than if they actually say, right, we're going to... Now, I appreciate it's probably a monetary thing, I suppose that's what you might say, but should that not be built into the business plan right from day one to say, actually, we need to start this, how we immediately go on?
I think in a perfect world, yeah.
Is that like a utopian vision sort of thing? Yeah.
That's the the blue sky thinking. The reality is different. Okay, there is a cost. There is a financial aspect to that. And again, some of that is around the management, some of it's around the infrastructure. So, if you're building out an online shop on a physical platform, you've got to build the shop on the platform you think you might need in 2 years' time. Very few startup businesses can really afford to do that, or should afford to do that, especially when you don't need to. And so what we're able to do is have a look at incumbent infrastructure, look at utilization, look at specification, and it might seem a little bit alien for a salesperson to be saying, you don't actually need to buy this much. You can probably get away with spending less, but that's what we do. And because of the agility that we have within the organization and the platform, we can scale you really quickly. If you go from 10 transactions a day to 1,000 transactions a day, that's not a problem. We will scale your solution in order to cope with that demand. And so I don't think a lot of people are aware that kind of flexibility exists. I don't think it's as actively promoted it perhaps as we do. Because, as I say, we are having conversations a lot of the time where we're saying to people, actually, you don't need to spend that much. You can do it like this, and then we'll grow with you.
Which is the utopian vision, I guess, to grow with the account. So it's probably more around a transactional, the amount of transactions, and trying to sort of see, I guess from a sales perspective, trying to keep with that customer who may not be looking to buy now, but is aware of where they've got to buy, where they've got to go in their education. And is that a challenge from a sales perspective to basically keep on educating those potential customers, because they're going to reach that point at some point. They're going to have to leap off and come over to the fast host sort of side.
Yeah, absolutely. And within Fast Host itself, we've got a couple of parts of the business. We have the original brand that do have a lot of these smaller e-commerce startup, scale-up type environments. And we're seeing more and more often now that actually, because of that awareness that we have created, that you have Fast Host customers themselves that didn't know that we existed. But because of the awareness we've now built, we're getting more and more inquiries from our own customers as well as customers from other platforms.
Yeah, so let's talk about Fast Host Proactive then in that way. What's the added plus from the proactive perspective? As you said, we got Fast Host Core, but obviously Fast Host Proactive is really the holy grail of service support, especially for those businesses who need to keep focused on what they're trying to do, and then you want to overlay the proactive service as well. So what's the real sort of nuggets in that?
I think the story with the customers we speak to from the core side of the business are very similar stories that we have with or hear from any SMB that look to engage with a managed service provider. And that typically is that they want to get online, they've got this idea, they want to be an online retailer or an e-commerce store of some kind, and essentially it's the quickest way to get online, and that usually will be typing in on Google, servers, buy, and they're online.
Yeah, they've got a domain.
We're exactly off. That, and we're off, and we're selling, and that's where they want to be. And it's that timeline that point in time, I should say, that suddenly traffic's coming to the site, transactions are increasing, and as we touched on earlier, that internal resource then becomes stretched, and it's at that point that they would look to engage with Fast Host Proactive to have that conversation around, well, how can you offload some of this burden and give us some time back so that we can carry on growing this business and this site?
Yeah.
Do you think you can look after that platform for us? And that's where we come in and provide really good service.
So let's just sort of wrap up here a little bit on this session. For anybody considering outsourcing their e-commerce IT managed services, what are the three things along that journey of consideration? What are the three things that they will need to do to make that a really easy process? Because sometimes it can be a little bit daunting, can't it?
I think the three main things to focus on are: think about where the business might be in 18 months to 2 years' time. How are you going to grow all of that supporting infrastructure as the business grows? I think another top tip, which I like to give everybody, whether they're e-commerce or not, is be very wary about vendor lock-in. Obviously, we mentioned some of the packages, and some of those packages, as John mentioned, once you're on them, to get off, you need to start from scratch, okay? Which is a sizable piece of work. So you be very, very careful about proprietary systems and vendor lock-in. And then finally, have a think about how you want your employees to be spending your time. Do you want them messing around with computers, or do you want them growing your business, working on things that will actively increase your brand and increase your transactional throughput? Those are the three biggies, I think.
And John, do you see, in general terms, that awareness when you talk to customers? Do you think they're aware of that in general, or is it you sort of beating the drum and basically saying, look, if you've not considered this, you should do by now?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the thing with servers and infrastructure and all the bits we've touched on here is they are quite often seen as nice to have as opposed to need to have. And it's not until the point that something does go wrong and customers start complaining that the website is slow and servers do go down,
Yeah.
to actually realise that you need to be investing in your infrastructure as an absolute priority to support your business and to keep it online.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, guys, that's been really insightful. Thank you. And I think for any budding entrepreneurs who are thinking they're going to have a bumper Christmas with their online website, crack on. But these guys are here to support you. So it's been some really interesting points. Thanks for joining us. Yeah, and we'll see you next time here at Fast Host Proactive for another session of Spill the IT.